She had always been the kind of woman who stood out, not just for her beauty, but for her strength. Canny Ong was the kind of person you couldn't forget, an IT analyst living in San Diego, intelligent, elegant, and with a quiet kind of courage. She held a black belt in Taekwondo, which said a lot about her discipline. But behind all that strength, she was also a loving daughter, and when her father fell seriously ill back home in Malaysia, she didn't think twice. She booked a flight home. It was a short visit, just 2 weeks to spend time with her family and say goodbye properly. On June 13, 2003, a day before her return to the US, her family threw a farewell dinner at a cozy restaurant in Bangsar, one of Kuala Lumpur's most popular areas. The night was warm, the food was comforting, and the table was filled with stories and laughter. No one could have imagined it would be the last time they'd hear her voice at peace. After dinner, her mother looked tired, so Canny, always thoughtful, offered to go down first and bring the car around. She took the elevator to the underground parking lot alone, telling her mom and sister to wait upstairs at the ticket machine. A simple gesture. A quick trip. Nothing out of the ordinary. But time started to stretch. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Still no sign of Canny. Her mother tried calling once, no answer. Twice, straight to voicemail. The waiting turned into anxiety, then dread. Something wasn't right. They rushed downstairs to the parking lot, only to find the space where their purple Proton Tiara had been parked was now empty. That's when panic truly set in. They begged the security guard to show them the CCTV footage. What they saw was the kind of moment that breaks you from the inside. The screen showed Canny. And then it showed a man, someone they didn't recognize, forcing her into her own car. It happened fast, too fast. And just like that, she was gone. A normal night had turned into a nightmare. 1 minute, they were planning a goodbye. The next, they were staring at a screen, watching a horror they could do nothing about. By midnight, fear had fully taken over. Canny's family had already called the police, and a missing person report was filed. Officers were alerted across the city. Every checkpoint, every patrol was on edge. But Kuala Lumpur at night is a maze of quiet roads and shadows, perfect cover for someone trying to disappear. Then, a break. At around 12:30 a.m. on June 14, 2 plainclothes police officers were patrolling on motorcycles near Kelana Jaya. That's when they noticed a familiar car. A purple Proton Tiara, just like the one reported missing. Inside were 2 people, a man behind the wheel, and a woman in the passenger seat. As the officers approached, something about the woman caught their attention. Her eyes were wide. Her body stiff. There was something off. They pulled up beside the car and asked the man to step out. He hesitated. Then Canny, sitting so close to safety yet still trapped, did something few people would notice. She began making subtle hand gestures. Small movements. Desperate signals. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't fighting. But her hands told a different story. To the officers, it was confusing. They couldn't quite understand what she meant. It wasn't enough. The man, later identified as Ahmed Najib, suddenly slammed his foot on the accelerator. The car jolted forward. In a split second, the chance to save Canny disappeared into the darkness. Reacting fast, the officers pulled out their firearms and shot at the tires, trying to disable the vehicle. But it was too late. The Proton Tiara sped off into the night, swallowed by the maze of streets. The officers gave chase, but the car vanished. What they did manage to recover were two important pieces of evidence: Kani Ong's identification card, and another belonging to a man named Ahmed Najib bin Aris. 27 years old. Unemployed. No criminal record, yet somehow now the prime suspect in what was quickly becoming a case that felt bigger than just a missing person. For a moment, the rescue had seemed possible. The police had been right there. Kani had been right there. And still, it slipped away. That night, what could have been a miracle turned into a haunting what if, a moment frozen in time, impossible to rewind. The sun had not yet risen, but the city was beginning to stir. Somewhere along a quiet roadside, the purple Proton Tiara had pulled over. A flat tire, maybe a bullet, had finally done its job. Ahmed Najib stepped out of the car and crouched beside the wheel, pretending to fix it. But even then, he seemed restless, rushing. Something about him didn't feel right. Driving past at that exact moment was a woman named Amina Isa Haq. She noticed the car, parked in an odd spot near a construction site. As she slowed down, she saw a man fiddling awkwardly with a tire, while a woman sat stiffly in the front seat. And then it happened, just a flicker of a moment, but one that would burn into Amina's memory forever. Their eyes met. Kani looked directly at her. Not with fear written all over her face, but with a kind of silent scream only another woman might notice. Her expression was controlled, but her eyes said everything. Something was very wrong. Amina didn't hear a word. But in that split second, she felt the message. There was no shouting, no waving, no chaos, just a quiet, desperate plea hiding behind a calm mask. She knew she had to act. Quickly, she memorized the car's license plate. There was no time to pull over or get involved directly, it was instinct, pure and sharp. She took mental note of the number, burned it into her brain, and drove on. Behind her, Ahmed had given up on the tire. As if sensing time was running out, he tossed the tools back into the car, climbed in, and sped off. The tire hadn't been changed. There had never been any real intention to fix it. It would be easy to look back now and ask, why didn't someone call right then? Why didn't she intervene? But the truth is, these moments pass in a flash. And when danger is disguised in daylight, cloaked in silence, even a small action like writing down a license plate can become a lifeline. For Kani, this was another near chance. Another thin thread of hope in a night full of vanishing opportunities. She had no voice, no freedom, but she had her eyes and she used them, fighting in the only way she could. And for the second time that night, the world almost saw her. Almost. The deeper the police dug, the more the silence of the night began to speak. What had once been a chaotic disappearance was now slowly taking shape, each clue falling into place like pieces of a puzzle. And one of those pieces came from an unlikely witness, a truck driver named Azizan Ismail. Azizan wasn't looking for trouble that night. He was parked near a construction site, not far from the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur, when he noticed a car nearby. Inside was a man and a woman. Nothing about it raised an alarm at first. They looked like a couple, quiet, close, maybe sharing a private moment. It wasn't his business. But later, he would remember more. Something about the woman's posture had been strange. Too still. Too quiet. He couldn't recall a single word spoken between them. Hours passed. When Azizan returned to the same area the next day, the purple Proton Tiara was still there, but this time, abandoned. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened the car door, stepped inside, and found a phone. Without knowing whose it was, or what it had witnessed, he took it and sold it shortly after. That one mistake made Azizan an unexpected suspect. The police, tracing the victim's phone, quickly linked it back to him. He was brought in, questioned, and for a moment, suspicion hung in the air. But Azizan had answers and he had seen the man who mattered most. From his testimony, investigators narrowed down the location. And near that very construction site, under an unfinished bridge, they found what they had feared the most. It was there, tucked away near a narrow culvert by the roadside, that signs of something dark began to emerge. Tires, two large ones, had been filled with cement and placed beside the drain. Burnt patches in the surrounding soil told a disturbing story. The car had been left nearby, just as Azizan described. But it wasn't just abandonment. It was cleanup. The kind that only comes when someone returns, not to confess, but to erase. Investigators believe Ahmed Najib had come back to the scene the next day. He had gone to buy gasoline. He had stood where the silence was thick, and the evidence was fresh. And then, he tried to burn what he had done to make the night disappear in smoke. But fire doesn't erase truth. It only draws attention to the places we should look closer. And now the police were looking closer than ever before. The truth had been buried under tires, behind flames, within shadows. But truth has a strange way of rising when you least expect it. On June 17, 2003, just days after the desperate search began, the discovery came. At a quiet construction site near Jalung Klang Lama, partially hidden by large discarded tires, Kani Ong's body was found. It was the moment her family had feared. The hope that she might still be alive was gone in an instant. Now the case was no longer just a disappearance. It was something far more haunting, something that demanded justice. Just 3 days later, on June 20, the police moved fast. With the clues gathered, aids left behind, testimonies from witnesses, the trail of the missing car, they arrested 27-year-old Ahmed Najib bin Aris. On the surface, he was a former airline cleaner. Quiet. Unremarkable. But what they would uncover would paint a very different picture. In the early hours of his arrest, Ahmed confessed. He told the police everything: how he had been in the basement parking lot, how he forced Kani into her car, and what happened next. But as the legal gears began to turn, so did his story. In court, Ahmed recanted, claiming he had been pressured by police, that the confession was forced, not real. But evidence, unlike words, doesn't change its mind. A search of Ahmed's home revealed a small bag. Inside were items that, at first glance, seemed ordinary: a pair of scissors, some tape, a few condoms. But one item stood out: a pair of jeans, stained with blood. Tests confirmed what the police suspected. The blood matched Kani Ong. Then came the scarf. It had been used to silence her. But the fabric wasn't just any scarf. It was made of a very specific material, one that airline cleaning crews used to wipe aircraft windows. A detail that tied back directly to Ahmed's former job. It was a chilling signature left behind without even knowing it. And then, there were whispers. Other women came forward quietly, hesitantly. They had their own stories, buried in fear and silence. Assaults that had happened in the same area, under similar circumstances. But these stories wouldn't make it to trial. Some of the victims were married. Others too afraid to relieve their trauma. No one wanted to speak openly. Without testimony, those cases were left as shadows. Still, the weight of the evidence was growing heavier. This wasn't random. This wasn't accidental. Ahmed Najib wasn't just a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had been there, lurking, watching, waiting. The justice system was no longer chasing ghosts. Now, it had something real. And it was closing in. When the trial began in September 2003, Malaysia was already watching. For 52 days, the courtroom became a theater of truth and denial, filled with testimonies, arguments, and faces holding back grief. Ahmed Najib stood before the nation not as a man misunderstood, but as someone accused of a crime that left an entire country shaken. His defense tried to cast doubt. They pointed to Kani's background in martial arts. How could someone with a black belt not fight back? Why didn't she scream? Why didn't she escape when she had the chance? But trauma doesn't follow logic. It doesn't obey the rules of strength or skill. Experts were brought in, those who had studied fear, survival, and the ways the human body reacts in moments of overwhelming terror. They testified that even the most capable person can freeze. That fear can silence louder than any scream. That when danger comes suddenly, sometimes the only instinct left is stillness. The jury listened. So did the nation. In the end, the evidence was too heavy to ignore. Ahmed Najib was found guilty of abduction, of assault, and of murder. In February 2005, he was sentenced to death. But justice, like pain, moves slowly. For 14 more years, the sentence remained. Appeals came and went. And finally, on the morning of September 23, 2019, the sentence was carried out. Quietly. Without headlines. The man who tried to silence a woman met his own silence. Kani Ong was laid to rest much earlier, on June 27, 2003. More than 500 people attended her funeral. Friends, family, strangers, many who had never met her, but felt her loss like a personal wound. A nation mourned not just a life taken, but the safety it once believed in. Her story didn't fade. It echoed. It became part of documentaries, books, and cautionary tales. Liz Porter's Crime Scene Asia would later include her case, framing it not just as a tragedy, but as a lesson in how science, courage, and truth come together, sometimes too late, but never without meaning. Today, the name Kani Ong still carries weight. It reminds people of the shadows that can hide in the most ordinary places. Of the importance of noticing a glance, a gesture, a signal. Of how silence can scream louder than words. And of how some stories, no matter how dark, must be told so they never happen again.